I want to start looking at the arpeggiator. Now, basically, an arpeggiator receives incoming MIDI notes, and it can receive it either from sequence data in your DAW or from real-time input. It receives the MIDI notes, and it outputs a sequenced pattern of notes based on a defined set of rules. Now, that's the textbook definition. Let's look at how it works in practice. I have a simple bass part loaded in here, bass sound loaded in rather, and a simple bass part programmed up. I'll play you what it sounds like as it is, and I'll hide this for a moment. You can see in my DAW, it's just a series of long-held notes, long and short notes. So it goes on like that. Now we go to the arpeggiator page here, and we need to turn it on. There's a power switch, as most of the sections in Trillion have, and there's a drop-down menu here for presets. So let's start by loading in a preset, and we'll just try a couple and see what happens. So you can see it's taking each note and it's breaking it up and it's playing it in these patterns. I'll try another one. So let's look at building some patterns from scratch. I'm going to go to the first one, which is a blank pattern by default, and we'll set the parameters. First thing we need to do is set the length of how long the pattern is going to be. I can set it to, let's say, 8 events or 16 events or 12. You can get some really interesting results if you like this kind of sort of random rhythmic generating of patterns, is to set it to an unequal amount to the time signature you're in. For example, we're in 4/4 time, so set it to something like 14 pulses or 15 or 11. That way you'll get some irregular patterns. But for now, let's keep it straight. So I'm going to have a 16-step pattern here that's going to be created based by clicking this yellow line there. And what we need to do is create events, and we can do that one of two ways. We can click the power switches here, and it'll generate a default event. Or we can just click in the lane, and it'll generate an event. Now you'll notice when I turn the switch on and off, it generates a stalk all the way to the top. The height represents the velocity. So it defaults to velocity, and you can adjust it by clicking and dragging the length of the velocity stalk like that. But I find a quicker way to be just to click within the lane and adjust the velocity all in one step like this. So that way you don't need to do the two separate steps of clicking the event on and then adjusting velocity. So let's create a couple of notes in this pattern at different velocities. And then we'll move on and set the resolution of these notes. Now we have 16 steps, and we determine in this clock field here what rhythmic value we want these 16 steps to get. And if they're set to 16th notes, that means this will equal a full bar. 16 steps of 16th notes is a full bar. If I set it to 8th notes, it would be 2 bars. I'm going to leave it to 16ths for now. Now the thing is, we're not going to hear the whole pattern played through because none of the notes in the pattern are much longer than a half note. This one's a little bit longer. I'll make it a bit longer just to exaggerate it a bit more. That one will play through maybe to the 9th step, but the rest of them will play 8 steps or less of the pattern. That's okay. Let's listen to what this sounds like. So you hear that longer note there played up until the 9th step. Now, we're not hearing a lot of discrepancy in the velocities, and that's because of the velocity slider here. We have a choice of how much we want these generated notes to take on the velocities that we have set in the arpeggiator. And if I move it all the way to the left, it'll respond to these velocities. And if I move it all the way to the right, it'll respond to the velocities of the incoming notes, meaning the notes that are programmed. And when it's in the middle, it's a balance of both. So let's move it all the way to the end now, and we'll hear the exaggerated velocities like I've set here. So you really hear that accent on the first downbeat. So you adjust with this slider how much you want the generated notes to take on the velocities that you have programmed here versus the velocities of the incoming notes. Let's see what happens if we set this pattern to 30-second notes. Now it'll go through more of the pattern because this is taking up a less number of beats in 4/4 time. That doesn't seem to be locking too well. I wonder why. If we look at our underlying data here, it's all quantized. It's all starting right on the downbeats. And the pattern is playing back perfectly divided rhythmic subdivisions. It's the drum groove that has a bit of swing to it. We're going to look at in another video how we can use groove lock to lock the feel and groove of these generated notes exactly to the drum groove. I'm going to end off here. In the next video, we're going to look at some of the other features here, and then we'll get to locking this in with the drum groove.